Hi everybody, welcome to the City and Guilds Navigating the UK Skills Challenges podcast. Today we are discussing with Jagdeep Soor and Donna Kenny everything to do with apprenticeships. We're discussing collaboration, widening participation, social mobility, and how to make apprenticeships better. Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us on this podcast today. With us we have Jagdeep Soor and Donna Kenny, who are now going to introduce themselves, who they are and what they do. Jagdeep.
Hi, thank you, Bryony. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Jagdeep Soor. I'm Executive Director of the Pathway Group. We also run a number of initiatives and events looking at equity, diversity and social mobility in apprenticeships and skills for marginalised communities. And I run some of those. So the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance, the Multicultural Apprentice Network, and also our Apprenticeship Branding Conference.
Donna.
Amazing. Lovely. Thanks for having me. My name is Donna Kenny and I'm the Deputy Director of the West of England Institute of Technology. Bit of a mouthful, but we're one of 21 Institute Technologies that are set up around England. We're basically education and industry working together in collaboration to look at higher technical education pathways, which obviously include apprenticeships.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna, and thanks for joining us today. So this particular podcast is based around apprenticeships because we've got National Apprenticeship Week coming up. So what we're going to be discussing today is what's happening with apprenticeships now, what should be happening with apprenticeships now and in the future, and your thoughts on that, and also on social mobility and equality and diversity and widening participation in apprenticeships, because that's also a really important aspect of making apprenticeships successful. So first question I'd like to ask you both, is the current apprenticeship offer and the structure and design getting the outcomes we need for the UK skills now and in the future? Jagdeep, do you want to go first?
Do I want to go first? That's a real challenging question, and sort of I'm going to be talking from perspectives of us as an independent training provider, the Pathway Group as an independent training provider, but also the patrons and our strategic advisors of the Multicultural Apprenticeship Alliance and Skills Alliance. So it's wide and varied, really. I mean, there's differing views, and I think what we need to look at is there needed to be a reform. Then there's a real issue around sort of skills gaps within certain sectors. There's also issues around reskilling within sort of certain sectors, your growth sectors and your dying sectors. So I think there's big issues there in terms of the reform that needed to be had. There's the issue around funding as well. So the levy pot not actually getting access to the apprenticeship provision as well, which is a big sort of contentious issue. So I think in terms of it not achieving results, and I think there's that real issue around sort of widening participation and social mobility for marginalised communities, or those not knowing about apprenticeships and those accessing apprenticeships from schools, and the knowledge base around sort of schools and FE around what apprenticeships are, and that competitive nature between apprenticeships and FE and HE. So I think there needed to be a reform, and hopefully it'll be for the better.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few levels, I suppose, to this, isn't there? You can look at it from do they work for employers? Do they work for FE, HE? Do they work for young people? And also, do they work for schools in terms of that, talking about that progression route? And I suppose in all of them, there's downfalls in all of them, in all of those areas. The fact that they are underpinned by employers is, absolutely, needed with those occupational standards. Perhaps the reviews need to take place quicker, because I think I read recently that, what we're training for skills will only last 3 years, and then after 3 years they need to be upskilled again. So do we need to look at regular reviews of those occupational standards that underpin those apprenticeships? The structure in terms of how that recruitment into apprenticeships, that can be quite a tricky landscape for young people to navigate. It isn't as straightforward as that kind of education system that pushes them down the UCAS route or that university route. It's different times of the year. And I think there is a piece to be had around that structure of how we perhaps maybe as industry look at how we can maybe align that with a better approach to how we encourage young people to apply into apprenticeships, rather than it kind of being a bit all over the place at the moment.
So from the point of view of the skills levy, currently we've got a levy which just covers apprenticeships. We know that the government is looking at turning it into a growth and skills levy. What are everybody's views on that? Jagdeep, you've obviously, I know that you liaise and work with a whole variety of different organisations, both FE providers and employers. What are their views on the changes to the Growth and Skills Levy? Do they think that's going to be a good thing? Because one of my concerns, one of the things that we hear out there all the time is that actually we know that the levy is almost underspent now. If they turn it into Growth and Skills Levy, which could look at things like boot camps, it could look at other types of courses and programs, is that going to be a good thing? Is it going to be a bad thing? Is it going to help widening participation and social mobility? Or actually, is it so stretched that we're looking at stretching something even more thinly across a landscape which really needs a lot more investment?
I think that's a valid point, and a lot of our the organisations that I work with in whatever sector, but even within whatever position they have held within the apprenticeship provision, they are really sort of concerned about that in terms of it really spreading even thinner than it actually is, so the funding not getting to where it should be. There's that real issue around that equity of opportunity for individuals as well, particularly around that social mobility piece. So how are they going to access an apprenticeship if the opportunity isn't there? There's that piece around, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, but with the level 7 apprenticeships, and there's a lot of larger employers who, within particular sectors, who are really going to be challenged with regards to what decision is made there, because a lot of their large amount of funding, the apprenticeship funding, is for that higher level apprenticeships as well. And then I think we've got that piece around those individuals who basically further education isn't for them. So they might have a challenge to they haven't got the functional skills levels or whatever it may be, or they haven't passed their GCSEs. So what is the option for them? Is an apprenticeship the most appropriate option? Yes. But how do they access that opportunity? Or do they fall out of the system and become neat? And I think that's a massive issue as well. Could become a massive issue if the funding is spread too thin.
Donna, what's your thoughts on that, and what might happen with the levy or what might not happen with the levy?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you've sort of spoke about the underspend, so it does need to be reviewed in terms of, okay, well, what we're doing with that. I think any kind of anything that comes into that skills and growth levy in terms of funding other qualifications, there should be a real thought around it has to be a technical education based qualification, so underpinned by those occupational standards that are the backbone of how apprenticeships through the reform that they had in 2017 have kind of been set up. So looking at our higher technical qualifications and other forms of technical education that can allow progression onto apprenticeships for as you said, that kind of widened participation. Absolutely, there needs to be kind of a review of that functional skills. I think that's probably a separate podcast on its own.
Yes.
But yeah, it definitely needs to have that review and looking at where is it feasible for those qualifications to be taken out of that skills and growth levy. It does definitely need to be something that is underpinned by what industry needs and not just qualifications that are decided, we need that. It has to be underpinned by what industry needs because, we know there's a skills gap. So this is how we can kind of, bridge that gap by, funding qualifications that are industry led.
We're talking about coming onto the whole functional skills issue, and we know that I was listening to, I can't remember, it was a conversation going on the other day where there was a few providers and a few employers talking about the fact that they've got young people who want to enter an apprenticeship, and in some cases older people in the workforce whose jobs, as you mentioned, Jagdeep, some jobs are disappearing, we know, and there are some people quite a lot of people in the current workforce that are going to need to retrain or upskill over the coming 5 or 6 years to stay relevant and stay employed. Potentially, we guess, I suppose, the Growth and Skills Levy could enable that as long as it's, qualifications or some other course or programme which enables people to do that. But also, if it's an apprenticeship, there are people trying to enter an apprenticeship who either can't enter the apprenticeship or who can't achieve that apprenticeship because they have to take functional skills, and for them that's just not an issue. But also, more importantly, those functional skills are not actually that relevant for the apprenticeship they're doing. And when they actually get to do the job that the apprenticeship is relevant to, they don't need the functional skills they've learnt in the first place. And so they've taken a qualification which is irrelevant to their apprenticeship, but they can't finish the apprenticeship, or they can't get onto the apprenticeship in the first place because they've got to have a level 1 or a level 2 in most cases for that apprenticeship. And the functional skills are just not working, and they're actually blocking that widening participation route that you were mentioning earlier on. Is that something that you're seeing when you're talking to your employers and you're talking to the organisations that you liaise with?
Yeah, I think functional skills is definitely, a pinch point, I would say. I think we're really missing, or employers are really missing a trick, or education's really missing a trick in terms of those young people that are out there that just don't function well in those exam scenarios. Perfectly capable of applying maths and English in a contextualised environment or a job in industry, but actually putting them in an exam scenario and having to do algebra, which doesn't kind of relate to anything in the workplace, is really difficult for them. And just because they don't have that benchmark that has been set, they are missing out on these opportunities. And I think also there's employers are setting that benchmark and asking for those grades, whatever they might be. And they're missing a trick in terms of that talent pool that they could encourage in. And rather than looking at academia qualification, it's looking at skills and what the interests are and how do they, what are those skills that they can transfer into that workplace.
So really embed the maths and English that's needed within the course or programme that's the apprenticeship, so it's relevant to the apprenticeship.
It should be functional, as it says.
Yes.
We speak about plumbers, having to install a sink in one corner and how much pipe do you need? And if you apply that in, a commercial setting, I'm sure some, young people will probably be able to put that into practice. Whereas if you ask them to apply some, algorithm in algebra, it probably will mean absolutely nothing, but it might be the same equation to get to that end result, but it's applied in industry and is contextualised.
Yeah, and I absolutely concur with that. I think it's got to be relevant, it's got to be functional, and it's got to be relevant to the industry and the sector. I think there's a lot of talk about, young people entering the apprenticeship provision. But I think we also need to look at, as we mentioned about certain sectors that are, there's growth sectors and dying sectors, and the need for people to reskill or retrain, and the economically inactive that are out there, your 1 million plus, who again, the apprenticeship could be the right route way for them and the pathway for them to reduce the skills gap. And I think that's something else we need to look at. For example, female returners, your 50 plus.
You were talking earlier on about your 50 plus project that you carried out. Can you talk a bit about that and what that did and how that worked?
That's right. Yeah. So I used to work for prior to my role here, I used to work for a What Works centre called the Centre for Aging Better, whose focus was on the 50 plus, specifically around health, homes and work. So I led also the work element, which is looking at redundancy and retraining and employment. So we did quite and it's currently going on actually, but it was looking at a test case and a case study around those who were coming out of, due to the reform in the diesel engines and decommission of diesel engines by 2030, and electric engines coming in, the issue around sort of reskilling the 50 plus within those sectors. So a fabulous case study project that was being run, looking at automotive and manufacturing sectors with Jaguar Land Rover, and also the supply chain with Jaguar Land Rover and the SMEs, and what the impact of that would be for the 50 plus. And it was a lot around, our apprenticeship's the best way for these individuals. Do we need to look at do we need to look at what specific support that they get from government sectors, such as Job Centre Plus or careers advice, and what does that look like for the 50 plus? And we looked at mentoring, whatever, and there's some great data and evidence that came out of that. And it was for specifically looking at reskilling these individuals and what their thoughts were around going into various sectors. And it's really, really challenging.
Yeah, it is. And Donna, you mentioned something earlier, because we were chatting earlier on before the podcast. You mentioned that project that went down in the southwest with Honda and...
Yeah, so Honda in Swindon and GKN, where it was before my time when I joined. So there was a lot of redundancies made within the Swindon Honda plant, and through the Institute of Technology, because we can kind of look at those flexible sort of learning and sort of training, GKN needed staff to be able to go in and do kind of fitting, sort of manual dexterity work. So it was a case of how they put together a short course that was upskilled those people that were being made redundant so that they had jobs and were able to kind of work within those kind of engineering fields. So again, a really good way of sort of showing that sometimes those shorter courses as well are really beneficial for kind of upskilling our older workforce.
Well, this is where this growth and skills levy could address some of this. And we were talking about this earlier on, weren't we? We were talking about careers and the fact that we've got a careers offer in this country which is not great, could definitely be better. Certainly for young people, we know that the careers and advice and guidance out there, it's still improving, and we hope it will keep on improving. But we were also talking about that need actually for the current workforce to have access to some sort of careers advice and guidance which enables them, particularly those, as you were saying, whose jobs are disappearing through automation or fourth industrial revolution, whatever it is we know the workforce is changing. There doesn't seem to be anything out there which will enable them to look at something and go, okay, so what skills have I got that I can use in another job, and what could I add on to that potentially maybe the growth and skills levy could address in terms of a short course. So you mentioned a sort of boot camp type approach that would enable them to do a quick short course or a 6-month course, but then move into another sector because they've upskilled to become a fitter where they were working inside the Honda plant or something similar. It should be feasible, surely, don't you think, for us to create some sort of function or some sort of website, particularly now we have AI, that actually says, okay, you've got these skills, you've got these qualifications, this is the job that you've been doing for the last 20 years of your life. With these, if you did this short course via the Institute of Technology or whatever FE college or wherever else is available, or actually if you apply for this apprenticeship, you could easily move into this new role and you're still relevant and your skills are still relevant. We've got AI, we've got that opportunity, and yet we don't actually have a function or a platform that does that in this country. And I know that other countries do. I think America has a platform that does something similar to that.
I wonder with some of the larger companies where you have your kind of learning development departments, I think they're really good at kind of, they invest in staff. So there is those conversations that are taking place in those L&D departments around upskilling, transferring over, large companies, they want to retain their staff. So there is that, conversation if they can see that, something is disappearing skills wise, how can they retain their trust, their loyal staff by maybe upskilling through that L&D and maybe skills and growth levy, depending on what qualification it falls under, with those sort of departments. But again, that doesn't kind of help our SMEs perhaps where, they don't necessarily have those resources and capabilities to be able to do that. So is there a case where maybe some of our larger employers could be kind of support or mentoring some of our SMEs to kind of, talk about those skills for the future and how, they can offer those sort of upskilling opportunities, whether it's through kind of FE, HE, or shorter courses, because we know that there is these future skills that are up and coming around the corner. They're not going away. And fundamentally, a lot of the skills that we have in the workforce can be transferred. There just needs to be industry-specific input to be able to create that transference into those industries.
So this all comes down to having more of a lifelong learning culture in this country, doesn't it? Which we don't necessarily have at the moment, I don't think. We know we've got the lifelong learning entitlement coming in. It's been pushed back to 2027. We discussed this in our last podcast with our CEO, Kirsty. But it really comes down to how does the government develop more of a lifelong learning approach? Can the growth and skills levy help with that? When I was young, my parents all went to evening classes. That doesn't really exist anymore, I think, in FE or even in HE. We don't really have evening classes which enable people to upskill in short, sharp bursts. And we also don't have that function on a platform anywhere, like the green energy passports, where actually if you're an electrical engineer or you're an electrician, it will tell you, okay, you've got these skills, you've got these qualifications. If you do this extra 20% worth of skills programs and courses, you can then become qualified to connect our wind farms up to the grid, which is going to be a skill and a job which is going to go on for the next 20 or 30 years, and everybody needs.
And I think sort of, industry has changed and it's no longer a job for life. Years and years ago, you move into engineering, manufacturing, or whatever it might be, and that's it, you're set for 30, 40 years or whatever it is. That is no longer the case. And I think there needs to be that drive towards, okay, so where are we transferring and how do we upskill to get into that? And if that just becomes natural, that is that lifelong learning. If we are encouraging that, yep, you are now working an aerospace engineer, brilliant, great. Actually, you're going to move into something more kind of green skills on energy offshore, and you just need to upskill 20% to get that industry specific knowledge to take you over to the wind turbines, the energy for offshore, and that is that lifelong learning. But it's encouraging it as that this isn't you've got the skills for life, but actually your career doesn't necessarily stay with that one company, or certainly within that one industry. It can transfer to multiples, but that will require that upskilling. But with that becomes lucrative, more progression, career progression, and a lot of young people we see are driven by money. So actually, if we're talking about those occupational pathways, and actually by upskilling, and you can do this and do this for 10 years, and then, you can reskill and do this. And what's that going to offer me in terms of return on, my wages? What does that look like in a car? What does that look like in a house? And that's speaking maybe sort of young people's language in terms of what does that, look like? Then that does encourage, I can, upskill and do that. And that hopefully will kind of encourage that lifelong learning.
And that's fabulous careers advice from Donna there. And the wish is that all careers advisors have that knowledge base, have that industry base knowledge, who are able to provide that careers advice for young people.
Do they?
And I think there's a real lack of knowledge within that. The majority of I'm probably stereotyping here, but majority of teachers, they've gone through the FE and HE process in that pathway rather than going through an apprenticeship, and they don't necessarily know what an apprenticeship is. So we're looking to develop a program to go into schools, and it's called My Perfect Apprenticeship, to go into schools and really talk about, to sort of year 8, 9s, 10s in terms of what an apprenticeship is, and this is an alternative route way to FE and HE. But in return, we're also educating the teachers and the careers advisors who are listening in on that course to say, well, yes, this is what an apprenticeship is, and is this the right pathway for this individual to go into, rather than going through to FE and HE.
That's true, isn't it? I was just thinking, reflecting on what you were saying there in terms of, we know that actually teachers in schools and in FE colleges to a certain extent, but definitely in schools, they give an awful lot of careers advice, but most of them have had little or no careers advice training. They're giving it from their own standpoint,
Absolutely.
almost as a peer mentor rather than as a real careers advisor. I can see Emily over there nodding her head. She's obviously our apprentice. She's been through a similar situation. So we've got people giving careers advice in schools who do not have that breadth of knowledge about what is going on in industry, what the options are, and what a real career path might look like for the young person that they're talking to, because they're only looking at it from their standpoint. What can we do to address that?
I think, I work with our local careers hub down in the southwest, and we've got a real kind of strong set of careers advisors. I think it's understanding that obviously they have to understand everything, our BTECs, our university courses, everything. So and with apprenticeships, it is a little bit more trickier to unpick. UCAS is set up in a way that you apply a certain time of the year, it goes through. Apprenticeships, it is very different, obviously, because you can apply at different times during the year. I've met with an apprentice recently, or a wannabe apprentice. She was at a school where I'm governor, and she's actually taken a year out to apply to degree apprenticeships because she knows how competitive it is. And she wanted to put her all into her A-levels to get the grades that she wanted to get. So she had those options. She has decided to go down the degree apprenticeship route. And as she is spending this year doing some work experience, going to all the open events and creating really good applications, and she can focus solidly on that. But one of the questions that we kind of ask, people, I think is now absolutely redundant. We sort of say to people, what do you want to be when you're older? And I think we need to stop asking people that, because there are so many different occupation pathways out there, and it can change, multiple times during your working life. And actually we should be reframing that and saying, what skills do you have? what skills you have, because they will transfer into multiple industries. And I think that's what we need to be looking at, is turning to a more of a skills approach rather than a qualification approach, and kind of what do you want to be? Because I think that's when we're going to get our young people to recognise their value, their skills, and then what pathways they can lend themselves to. And technical education being skills is a really, obviously, good sort of way of moving into that sort of field and getting qualified into a career that you want to progress in.
And that just as much applies, I think, to the current workforce, doesn't it?
It does. And just going back to Donna's point about looking at new teachers coming in and the advice, I think a real quick win could be around that collaborative approach. We could get industry experts, apprenticeship experts. The apprenticeship programs and provision is so complex. You have your different levels, you have your different standards, you have your different entry routes, entry dates, etc., etc. If schools or FE or HE just did a collaborative approach where they got industry involved, employers involved, your provider involved, your etc., whoever is involved within the apprenticeship provision, and did a regular sort of updates and etc., and did regular sessions with these individuals, then I think that's probably a quicker win rather than sort of looking to reform sort of the DFE way.
I completely agree. Sorry, Donna, I completely agree. Yeah.
And on that as well, so kind of what we do kind of in our IoTs, it is about that collaborative approach. And actually, I had a meeting yesterday with all of our education partners and employer partners for exactly that. How do we look at doing some kind of technical upskilling for our teachers in secondary schools as well as FE as well, because it's that progression onto HE, where there is technical education available within that route, HTQs and degree apprenticeships. But there are challenges of that, as we know, timetabling, getting teachers out there. So we're looking at that immersive learning using AI, and that is something that we're in very early stages of, but something that with us kind of in the West of England IoT, using our strength as a collaboration, we can kind of roll that out across the region and hopefully maybe, be a bit of a trailblazer for what that looks like across England. So watch this space.
Talking about that later on.
Yeah,
I mean, it's that word collaboration is so important. It's come up again and again during the podcast, but where I've heard it and where I've heard people talking about collaboration, not just across colleges and schools, but also between industry, between employers and colleges and schools. That's where everything really works well. It's getting employers more engaged in what is going on in the post-16 sector, whether that's the current workforce that needs upskilling or whether it's young people coming into the workforce. If that collaboration's happening, everything works more smoothly. The teachers understand what the opportunities are. The young people understand what the opportunities are. People who are in the workforce can see what they can do that's going to upskill and keep them relevant in their career and their job going forward for the next 10 or 15 years. Collaboration, there's got to be some way that this government can encourage more collaboration between the FE sector and employers. And I'm wondering whether the Growth and Skills Levy can do something along those lines.
I think it should. I think that should be one of its main objectives. I mean, there's a great example, really, not because I work for the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance, but it is a great collaborative community that we've built there from a variety of corporate employers, public sector employers, FEH institutions, awarding bodies, EPAs, endpoint assessment organisations. But then also a lot of strategic providers who look at evaluation, who look at sector leaders within youth employment and things such as that. And the amount of collaborative work that's been done there, the amount of shaping on their various apprenticeship provision and their onboarding and their recruitment that's been done, and the flex that they've incorporated and embedded in their system, it's been quite impactful, really, in terms of what they've done. And they're all invested and committed into getting more individuals into the apprenticeship space, but by learning from each other. And that's just an example, and I'm sure there's many more that go on, but that collaborative approach is the way really a quicker win.
Yeah, we definitely need to be sharing that best practice.
Definitely, and I think with kind of what you're saying about that collaboration is I think maybe what government needs to be doing is actually seeing what is actually happening with collaborations at the moment, because there is a huge amount taking place. We're one of 21 IoTs across England that all work collaboratively within our regions to focus on priority skills sectors, and kind of what you're doing is that collaboration. So I think they need to maybe understand fully what is happening so that they can put more money behind those collaborations that are established rather than trying to set up new initiatives that will need to get off the ground, work with what we've already got because we've got momentum going with what we're doing. You put your money behind that because we can keep that momentum going and make a real impact.
It's interesting you say that because the government has just published the Further Education Call for Evidence, which is asking for input from employers, from the whole FE sector, for what they should do in terms of the growth and skills levy, in terms of just generally post-16 education going forward. This is an opportunity, isn't it, for the sector, for employers, for FE providers, for IoTs, for private providers, for anybody engaged in the FE sector to feed in and say, actually, look at the money we've got. It could be so much more effective if you used it to encourage more collaboration between the sector and between employers. And we've got the adult skills budget, and I've mentioned this before, there's a 3% flex in the adult skills budget at the moment that enables FE providers to work with employers to use some of their funding to research or produce courses and programs which address specific skills needs that employer's got. If we flexed our post-16 budgets more effectively and more creatively so that there was more collaboration encouraged and employers got what they needed, learners got what they needed, and providers were enabled to use that money with more creativity to address the skills needs of the nation, we could do something really amazing. Because, we know that the budget is tight. We know that, unless Rachel Reeves comes up at the next budget and says, actually, we're going to encourage more money into the FE6 post-16 sector by doing this with the skills levy. I've got all sorts of ideas about what she should do. I'm sure that if I mention, there's a lot of employers out there that would go, so I'm not going to say, but I honestly think that we need more investment for employers. And if they can't afford to invest money, because we know that obviously times are tight, then potentially there must be other ways that employers can contribute more and collaborate more with the FE to make the most of the money that we do have.
We see that in the IoT. So our employer partners, they sort of contribute time.
Yes.
They put their time, so they help us with, again, if I go back to that teacher the sort of technical skills piece we're looking at, we work with JISC, who are a large digital employer.
Yes.
Brilliant on the educational platforms, amazing with AI and immersive learning. And, they'll support us as one of our partners. So we do have, our employers, we have like an employer charter as part of our IoT, where employers will sign up to be partners. And that will involve kind of doing guest lectures, offering T-level placements, work placements, whatever that may be, to be a part of the roundtable discussions that we have within the IoT to talk about what industry needs, how do we develop those qualifications, and how do we, protect those future skills moving forward.
I think the challenge in terms of we're talking about a collaborative approach, and we're talking about governing bodies or umbrella organisations who lead various sectors. Having that collaborative approach, I think the challenge with these various organisations is they all have different asks, and the funding parameters won't allow them just to. They have an ultimate aim really to look after their members or look after the actual sort of institutions that they're working alongside. So there's certain organisations or umbrella bodies who might have different asks or different priorities than another. And I think that's the challenge with this collaborative approach and sort of lobbying with those one or two asks.
Everybody's got a different requirement.
Yeah.
Something that Eric and I noticed during our analysis of the LSIP is actually there's an awful lot of noise out in the sector about what's needed and what could be done. But I still think that there's an ability out there for government to listen to it and pull out the key themes that are coming across over and over again from everybody, because there's going to be key themes. There always are. There's going to be things that say this is what we need. One of the things that's been coming up again and again, and we were talking about this earlier, was the duration of apprenticeships and the fact that, we've got apprenticeships where the minimum duration is 12 months. But Donna, you were saying, we know that there are apprenticeships out there where actually the employer and the learner have both agreed that at 9 months, that young person or that apprentice, be they a young person or an older person who's already in the workforce, has gained all the skills they need, but they've reached the 9 months. So they don't bother to achieve the apprenticeship and finish it and do the EPA.
Yeah, definitely.
Because there's no need. They're completely skilled at what they need to do. So the government's looking at shorter duration apprenticeships. What are your views about the benefits and the challenges of that?
I think the entry-level apprenticeships, so if you kind of look at our level 2, level 3s, then they, having a more flexible approach to the length and duration of apprenticeship is definitely something that needs to be considered. The report that we read was around that kind of 9-month pinch point where, you've had 9 months commercial experience. We use business administration for an example. 9 months into that role, you'll competently be able to carry out that job role. And sometimes the employers then don't really see the value of going through to that EPA, and that young person is like, well, I've got a job and they've offered me a permanent role, and actually, we need to. There's a bit of re-education on both sides there, isn't there? But if we shorten that duration of the apprenticeship, then we're seeing people able to go through and progress quicker as well onto those higher level apprenticeships that we see out there, or degree apprenticeships, or even some of those the HTQs or some of the other courses that are out there that just need to be, that young people want to, reskill up or upskill within certain areas. So having that shorter duration apprenticeship, I definitely think is something that needs to be considered, but it does need to be looked at on an individual case basis. There are some apprenticeships out there that will never ever be 9 months because of the technical competencies and the qualifications that are embedded into it. But yeah, there are some of those entry level roles which really helps that social mobility, to enable those people to be able to get on that ladder of progression, get their foot in the door in these these companies to start progressing their careers.
Skills England have got, and the government have got this call for evidence out of post 16. From the point of view of you as a participation organisation and an IoT, an organisation in the post 16 sector, what 3 key points or plans would you like to see Skills England and the government implement to address the skills needed now and those in the future workforce? I know that's a real mean question, guys.
I'm going to throw. Shall I throw one? I think they really need to listen to the evidence. They need to see what is actually happening out there, and rather than rebranding and reinventing stuff, is seeing what is actually working and putting money behind that. Simplification of the apprenticeship system. I think that kind of does what it does on the tin. Really, it's kind of we know there's lots of sort of flaws around it, and I think that does need to be looked at. And I think that kind of, how can we simplify that apprenticeship system? The third one, I don't know. I might have to come back to that one. I'll have to think.
So I think it's more about, well, concur with everything you've said, and probably these are going to align with your thinking as well. But one is around ensure that the funding gets to where it should be, and we don't have that sort of that levy pot in the cloud that goes back to Treasury, or whether it doesn't get to industry. That's a big thing. So the skills and levy, the growth and skills system actually does what it says on the tin. I think the second bit is around that, ensuring that social mobility is key at this, and getting those individuals and disadvantaged communities, and really looking at that equity of opportunity and accessibility of opportunity for disadvantaged communities, but also communities and individuals who are the intersectionalities, really. So individuals who are really missing out and could contribute so much to society, contribute so much to the skills gap, contribute so much to the economy effectively.
Yes, so there was we were at a conference the other day, and there was some statistics and some research that's been done that said that organisations that recruit more diverse workforce have more diverse customers and more customers. So generally your customers become more diverse because you've got a diverse workforce, therefore you get more custom. So I mean, that should be key to any organisation's thought process if you want to be economically successful. And what was the other one that was said? It was around. So yeah, the thing is, recruiting a diverse workforce is a really difficult thing for most employers to get their heads around, isn't it? Mm. We were talking to the West of England about some of their research into how employers recruit, and I think a lot of employers recruit in a way that actually excludes people without even realising that they're doing it, because they ask for things like degrees in what is really a level 3 job. Mm-hmm. And absolutely. Yet there needs to be a sort of a new approach to how you recruit, and as an employer, and how we encourage employers to recruit and what they actually ask for. I think that would be another really key thing to address. And
I think as well with employers, we need to kind of remove that or equivalent when we're looking at what qualifications. And what we never see in our job descriptions is an apprenticeship. we see degrees and we see level 3 A levels, but we never see what we would like you to have is an apprenticeship in, because that's that gold standard, that's that industry spec, that's what we want as an employer, but we never see that in job descriptions.
That's amazing, isn't it? Because when you think about it, I know so many employers that have said to me, apprenticeships are just amazing.
But
They're
do they put it in their job
but do they
descriptions?
We never see it. You're
No,
right, because
exactly,
I've never
yeah.
actually seen it in an advert, and I've never seen it in a job description.
Yeah.
You must have an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And I think, looking at that kind of equity piece as well, it's about how do we look at that recruitment, those pathways into those apprenticeships in terms of assessments, accessibility. Is it equity? Is there equity there for people that want to be able to apply? We know that people that are really well supported by parents, they're really confident, able to do that. The ones that don't necessarily have that confidence, they won't ask for that support. So they will struggle through that application process. But that doesn't mean they're any less employable or they're any less, as matched as the candidate that is really supported. So I think there is a piece to be had around that equity with how do we have those conversations with our employers to, make it more accessible to all.
Yeah, I was reading something about evidence, really. Somebody put that it's harder to get degree level apprenticeship than it is to get into a Russell Group university.
Yeah.
So, and there's certain case studies that we can talk about where there's sort of, a handful of apprenticeship opportunities, degree level apprenticeships, and thousands of individuals have applied for those.
Yeah.
And there's that real piece around equity of opportunity and
Yeah.
social mobility there as well.
And a lot of young people are using apprenticeships as their first choice and their university as backup.
Yeah.
So if for whatever reason they don't get offered an apprenticeship of their choice, they will then go to university as a backup.
It should be the other way around.
But it should absolutely, because what we're doing then is employers, you kind of almost need to, again, it goes back to that. Should you be having those A stars? What does that mean as a person? That means you did really well in that exam, but actually, as a person, you might be able to work perfectly fine in that role, but you might have got a C or a B or whatever it might be. So again, employers are sort of cutting their nose off to spite their face by putting those goalposts really high in terms of what their expectations are of those young people. And those ones that are perfectly capable of going down the university route, but they choose the apprenticeship route, that is sort of wiping out this talent pool of young people that can't go down that apprenticeship route. Can't go down that university route.
It's encouraging employers, and I think it comes back to that careers advice conversation we had earlier on, to value both routes. I mean, there is always a place for the academic and the HE route, always. But actually the value of young people coming up through apprenticeships and coming up through other courses and programmes which are similar to apprenticeships, whatever they are, and I'm not talking about unpaid internships because I just think they are an incredibly bad idea. It's again, that's a widening participation issue, I think, with unpaid internships, which only really can be done by people who can afford them or whose parents are willing to support them. But the apprenticeship route needs to be just as valued as the academic route.
We talk about equity in terms of people going into the workforce, but actually there needs to be equity in terms of apprenticeships and university.
Yeah.
They are equal standard.
And the crazy thing is, when employers do them and they're done well, they are just as valued. In some cases, valued even more, dependent on the type of employment or the type of sector subject area that the young person's or the currently employed person is going into. The apprenticeship is actually a better route. We are one of the only countries in the world that actually has more than 50% of the population go to university. Switzerland, which is the most economically successful country in the world, only 15% of their population go to university. The rest of them are all apprenticeships. And their apprenticeships go right up from the sort of young person, entry level, right up to you can now swap and go into a degree if you want to. But the route is via apprenticeships because that's the way they gain the work experience and the knowledge and skills.
Yeah, and just going back to the point of ED&I and apprenticeships, we have so many, so we really sort of... I'm a real strong believer and advocate of that lived experience, that lived reality of an apprentice. And the amount of multicultural apprentices that you hear, you speak to, and all they say is, I am the first. I'm the first person within my family to have gone through an apprenticeship. So we really need to build that base up as well and get a refrain from those individuals saying, I am the first. It should be a pathway for anybody and everybody.
And we talk about sharing best practice as well. If you talk about the success of Switzerland, should we be learning off Switzerland? Should our government be sharing some? Should we be getting some best practice from them so we kind of know what we need to be doing for? Because that's what
it's done in other
our
sectors.
that's what our aims are with our technical education. Is we want to push that in the forefront. So let's speak to people that are doing it and how are they doing it? What works and where are the challenges and what can we do to improve? What we need to do in this country.
Absolutely. Guys, it's been really great to speak to you. Thanks so much. I mean, your background and your experience in the apprenticeship sector and in what you do is blatantly obvious. Just as individuals, is there anything else that you think that you would like to add to the conversation? Anything else that you think that would be interesting for our audience to hear?
Just a couple of things I'd like to bring across. Obviously, National Apprenticeship Week. We run as an organisation a festival of apprenticeships, which is 3 careers roadshows throughout the year, but we're doing a lot during the National Apprenticeship Week in terms of webinars, and I believe City and Guilds are involved in that.
Fantastic.
And we are also having an apprenticeship branding conference coming up on the 3rd of April at Millennium Point in Birmingham. It's not very policy driven. We want it impactful, innovative and inspirational. And that's on the 3rd of April. It's the Apprenticeship Branding Conference, Engage.
Wonderful. Donna?
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, obviously National Apprenticeship Week coming up, but I think, it's great that we have these weeks that highlight apprenticeships and kind of different qualifications, different days throughout the year, but apprenticeships are kind of all year round. And I think, anyone that's kind of listening to this that kind of is in industry, in education, you might be a parent or a carer or a teacher, is reach out to your local Institute of Technology, your local FE college, your local HE college. How can you engage as an employer? How can you explore apprenticeships more for your business? Get involved. How can you, as an apprentice, maybe inspire that next generation? So just think, apprenticeships, we've got the week coming up to celebrate it, but think about it all year round because...
More apprenticeship ambassadors.
100%, definitely. Yeah. And I am an advocate massively for apprenticeship. I will keep banging the drum.
I know you will. I know what a great advocate you are, Donna. You both are. I think it's great, the work that you do. Thanks very much for joining us today. It's been great to have you. This is going to be a great podcast when it comes out. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with a colleague and let us know what you think in the comments at the bottom.